I was a ham radio operator once. I went to a crash course. I guess my first interest in ham radio was I was dating a girl that lived in Tennessee, or she was going to college in Tennessee, and I thought, well, somehow I can get on these ham radios and link all the way across the Appalachian states and talk to somebody in Tennessee, and I won't be in trouble with my dad anymore for all these long distance phone calls. Well, that never quite worked out. I went to a crash course, got my certification. I took a class in the morning, took a test before noon, went to lunch, came back and took another crash course, and then took a test that evening and got the certification. It was the no-code technician at the time. You had the novice and then the no-code tech. Got my certification, took my radio and programmed it onto some of the local repeaters. I talked on it twice, I think it was, and realized this is way too much like work, because I was working in a communications center at the time. And our license went 5 or 6 years, however long it goes, and expired, and I never renewed them. So if you're like me and Jeff, where you mess with this stuff for a living, it's not nearly as much fun as when you're doing it as an amateur and you have time to actually enjoy your hobby. But I'm going to talk a little bit about interoperable communications in general, but at the same time I'm going to bring that into the interoperable radio system that we're using across the state of West Virginia now. I want to take a second to date myself. I don't see anybody in here that's, well, I see a few people in here that are young, but there's a few people in here that's got a little age on us. You know you're getting old when your kids bring things up from the basement and say, "Dad, what is this?" When they don't recognize 8-track tapes and cassette tapes and record players and that kind of stuff, you know you're getting old. And chances are most kids that graduated high school last year never used a record. They've always had a cell phone, and they've always had a CD. All of that's been invented within their since before they were born. So things have changed so much. And we talk about, the gentleman back here was talking about communicating back from Germany. Now I take my Magic Jack, which I can get for $49 a year, and I carry it across the ways with me to China, and I plug it into my hotel room, and I can call back and talk to everyone at home, and it's free. The only problem is that when I dial 911 from Magic Jack, it rings back into Lincoln County, West Virginia. It's a little complicated. I've been with the 911 Center in Lincoln County for a little over 20 years. The emergency manager over there, and I also work for the fire department here in the city of Charleston. We use the state digital radio system in the city of Charleston. We have used it as a fire department since 2007. Here, the Charleston Police Department just switched last week. So more agencies are switching to that, but I want to read during the such and such incident, communications technology did not meet modern standards with limited emergency radio channels and so much traffic, firefighters found it difficult to communicate with one another. Many found themselves cut off. Anybody want to guess which incident that was from? Nobody's going to get it, especially you guys. You guys are too young.
I say NBA.
That was from Las Vegas, Nevada, the MGM Grand Hotel fire. Any of you that remember the MGM Grand Hotel fire, 80-some people burned to death, or 80-some people died in the fire, primarily because of smoke inhalation. It's not the current MGM Grand, that if you've ever been to Vegas lately, it's what's now Bally's, and it's forever changed the fire code. So in 1970, when people were jumping out of the rooms of the hotel in Las Vegas, and charter helicopters that normally flew people over the Hoover Dam were landing on the helicopter, or landing on the roof of the hotel and rescuing people, that's what they cited after the incident. Poor communications, inability for each other to talk with each other, and the inability for firefighters to have enough capacity.
Yeah,
now,
they couldn't reach them.
Couldn't reach each other. Now, let's go a step further. The Secret Service and Capitol Police were unable to communicate with each other by radio during critical moments after a woman tried to ram her car through the barrier at the White House. When was that?
Ronald Reagan got shot.
Last month. Last month. Lady tried to ram, and the people weren't able to talk from police agency to police agency. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that we go back to the 1970s, it was brought up. We go back to the first World Trade Center incident when they tried to bring the building down and weren't successful. It was brought up there. It was brought up when the jet crashed into the hotel in, was it Kansas or wherever, many, many years ago. It was brought up during Katrina. It was brought up, and for years and years and years, that's the main issue that's been brought up. And there's lots of things that can be done with interoperable communications between agencies, between people like you all and first responders, and many of you, I'm sure, in this room wear dual hats. But it takes planning, and it takes someone sitting down to do that. The federal government designated 4 or 5 UHF channels. And what is UHF? UHF is ultra high. They designated several VHF channels as interoperable channels, that every single radio out there that public safety uses, fire department, EMS, police, should have those interoperable channels in those radios. And when I talk about UHF and VHF radio, that may be completely foreign to some of you. Does everybody know what that means? I bet you they don't. I think of the radio spectrum as a big rainbow. And every single thing that you communicate on is on that rainbow somewhere. The antenna height is relative to the frequency that you're on. You can look at this radio and tell that it's probably a multi-band radio, or it's a radio that does a fairly low frequency because it's got a long antenna. You remember our cell phones, the ones back when they did have antennas, they were really short because the frequency was much higher. Everything is on that rainbow somewhere. Our radios, the aircraft communications. How many of us do Project Lifesaver? Project Lifesaver, those transmitters are on certain frequencies. How many of us have kids or grandkids that have radio-controlled toys, remote-controlled cars? All of those are on the frequency somewhere. Garage door openers, everything is there. And the FCC basically takes that rainbow, chops it up into segments, and gives permission to use certain areas for certain things. So a VHF radio might be at 150 megahertz, where a UHF radio is at 450 megahertz. In here, between here is, oh, who listened to the radio on the way into the conference? What'd you listen to? What station?
Public radio.
Public radio. What frequency, you remember?
88.5.
88.5. So it's 88.5 megahertz. So we know those frequencies by where they're at on the band. And the thing about public radio, when she says that, if you take a look at the commercial radio band, all of your non-commercial or your public education channels or your college channels or your free government-owned radio stations are down on the lower end of the band, and it's reserved for that. And then if you listen to country in Charleston, you probably listen to 97.5 WQBE. If you listen to hard album-oriented rock or a little harder stuff, FM 105, 105.1 megahertz. So everything falls within that band somewhere. And the main thing about interoperable communications is making sure that you have the right radio to talk to the right people in the right location. And many radios will function in one area of the band, but they don't function in another area because it's too far away for the receiver. Now, having said that, I would venture to say that this is a Motorola APX 7000. This radio has the capability of communicating in the 150 band, in the 450 band, and also digital. Anybody want to guess what the cost of this radio is?
Probably around 300, but I only got like a 100 miles.
Okay, this radio is in excess of $5,000. It is because it is digital, it is because it is trunked, and it's because it works in more than one band. Quite frankly, I'm not as important as Jeff is. And I have a hard time figuring out why we need a $5,000 or a $6,000 radio. Maybe I'm a little cynical. I think there's some of them need to exist in every single department, for commanders, for the fire chief, for the police chief. But does everybody need a $5,000 radio? Absolutely not. The radios that we use in Charleston for the fire department here only work in the 450 range. And that's what it looks like. It's been a lot more beaten and battered than his radio, but this radio can be purchased for about $1,500. Now the difference between public safety grade radios and ham radio operators are, ham radios tend to maybe not be quite as sturdy or as durable or as waterproof, and in many cases they meet a different set of standards than the public safety radios. You can get a radio, I saw somebody, I think it was maybe Wirt County, or somebody had a Bofang or Wofang or Wushang or whatever radio out here on the desk. When looking at that, those radios can be bought for 50 to 60 bucks. But like he said, if it's field programmable and it's on the public safety band, it's illegal. But I'm telling you, you can buy it on eBay tomorrow or today. The only thing you've got to keep in mind is that when you buy radios like that, if they get in the wrong hands of the wrong people, it creates problems. But if you have a radio like that and you're responsible with it and you treat it right and you don't do anything goofy, nobody's going to come looking for you.
They're new and they just came out with this FCC approved.
It's Part 90 accepted.
Yes, it is.
And I think a lot of the radios that come out of Asia, China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong and Japan, initially they aren't Part 90 accepted because it takes a while to get them Part 90 accepted.
What does that mean?
Part 90 means the FCC has certified that that radio doesn't create harmful interference to other radio waves and it's acceptable for public safety use. Is that in a nutshell?
Yeah.
If you buy a radio and it interferes with somebody else or on someone else's frequency, then they've got a right to complain. So keep in mind that radios have different operating areas. And in order to be interoperable, it's important that you use the type of radio that you need in the right area. I told them earlier while you stepped out of the room, I wasn't as important as you because you had the $5,000 radio.
$6,500.
$6,500, okay. Whoa. He's got the modified.
Thank you, taxpayers.
Truthfully, this radio for most people, it's out of range for the majority of people. And like I told him, it better make coffee, it better rub my feet, it better rub my back, it better do something for that kind of money. But how often do you actually use the interoperability function on that radio?
I haven't yet, except for training purposes.
Okay. So don't think that you have to have a radio that is that expensive to be able to do something with interoperability. Now we talked about having radio frequencies in the 450 band and radios in the 150 band. There are channels that were created by the federal government, interoperable channels. They're called UTAC or VTAC channels. You can go out and Google them, you can go out and find them. Any radio person that has any knowledge at all can find that pretty easily. All of those channels are out there, and those channels were created so that everybody would have a group of channels that they could use in the event of an emergency.
And is that supposed to be just for first responders or?
Just for first, not for, it's not open for the public to
That's what I
use.
thought.
No. But it's a channel that you don't have to go get a license for, that you can go, and I mean, for most, I think everybody in here is maybe not a first responder as far as fire, police, or EMS, but these these type of people, community emergency response people, would fall into that category just as well with using those interoperable channels, and that's what they're there for. Keep in mind that they're there. Now, having said that, there are several counties in the state that have went as far as to place those channels on the air in their counties so that people could use them that were coming into the county or into the jurisdiction that maybe wouldn't have the regular channels. Cabell County has done that with some of their, across the county at some of the sites. I think Nicholas County's done it. I know some of the other counties have done it. Has Kanawha County looked at that or put any of those UTAC or VTAC channels on the air?
We have UTAC 43 in Spring.
Yes, UTAC 43 is at the, we call it Spring Hill, but it's the big cemetery that overlooks Charleston.
And I'm really angry about this.
Well, ask, go ahead.
So what does that mean, they're putting it on the air? Because to me, when you told me they're already there, they already exist.
They exist, but somebody's got to listen to it.
Okay.
And many of those frequencies are repeater frequencies. So if it's a single channel or a simplex channel, I get a radio, I can talk to you from here to there. That's great if we can see each other or we are within a mile of each other. But when you put the radio at the tower site, it actually receives one channel and transmits on another. So units that are in the field, no Wheaties for breakfast this morning. Units in the field don't talk to each other. Units in the field talk to the tower site
Okay.
and then transmit back out.
So you're talking about towers.
The tower.
That's right.
And that's what we're seeing some of the agencies, like you said, UTAC 43 is on the air in Charleston. Cabell County's put several on the air, and we're going to try to put one of them on the air over adjacent to Cabell County, over in Lincoln County. So those channels are there. And fire departments and police departments and EMS agencies are sometimes very, very slow to make changes or add changes to radios because it's a big deal to bring your entire fleet in and sit down and update those channels and update those radios. But keep in mind, UTAC and VTAC channels do exist and they should be in radios because it's a cheap and easy solution for you to be able to do interoperable radio communications. In addition, years ago we had, everybody and their brother had CB radios. Probably the replacement for CB radios, I would say, was the FRS, or Family Radio Service Frequencies. FRS channels are in the 450 area. FRS radios are the little radios that you can go to Walmart, Gander Mountain, and half a dozen other places and buy 2 of them for $49. Those are FRS radios. They exist. They are all in the 450 megahertz range. But here's the thing that I know some agencies have done, that if you take a public safety radio like Jeff has or like I have, actually go as far as to put those FRS channels in your radio as a first responder. Why? So that you can talk to the general public if they have an incident, and that's the only form of communications that they have. And I know that several instances across the country, public safety would put out, we're monitoring channel 11 or channel 19 or whatever. They would monitor that channel, and then the public would have a way of getting a hold of first responders when there was some type of loss of communications.
Just to clarify something, like Tina, I'm very ignorant about this stuff. When I talked to our 911 director, he said, we don't want the search to have radios because we don't want them interfering with the professional responders. I said, okay, but how are we supposed to communicate? And that's where I said maybe we should look at amateur radios.
I think there's probably other solutions other than amateur radio that would be cheaper and easier, because that means everybody's got to get a license and everybody's got to go out and go through a class.
No, I was thinking like a team leader precinct.
Well, and you could do that.
The problem is we would have such bad communication in the county, but we don't have.
What county are you? What county are you in?
Monroe County.
Okay. Every county is different,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to step on someone else's turf.
I know.
But I'm going to tell you that in Lincoln County, it wasn't what I thought was the best solution, but we've got 3 or 4 very large community policing organizations. And the crime watch units actually go out. There's one bank in a rural area of the county every morning. A couple gentlemen go down and they wait for the ladies to unlock the bank, and they go in and lock the bank. They tell them bye, have a cup of coffee, and they leave. They've got our sheriff's department radios in their car.
Really?
But they also have identifiers on them, and we know exactly who they are, and they're told, you don't get on this radio under any circumstances except to report an emergency, and if you do, you lose the privilege. It's all how you police it. And it's worked fairly well for us, and then we found them another channel that they could use in the same radios to talk to each other for traffic control. There's lots and lots of channels out there that are easily licensable for radio-to-radio communications for groups just like a CERT. You can apply for a radio license as a CERT if you have a nonprofit organization, and obviously you have some type of governmental affiliation or you wouldn't be a CERT. So there's other frequencies that you can go out there and apply to for your own use without using the 911 channels. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And without their permission, you don't need the local OES director's permission.
That's correct. The local OES director, as powerful as we want to think we are sometimes, we do not sign off on radio license when someone applies. You apply, the FCC coordinates it, and you can get it. There are a lot of people that have radios out. Somebody mentioned, we don't have a whole lot of radio operators in our county. We don't know. I'm almost certain that you can go to the FCC website and look up, and it gives you a list of everybody that has an amateur operators or a lot. Really?
Just like Mercer County.
Well, I would almost guarantee that if you meet with that Mercer County group and you want to encourage some of those people to work with you, those guys will go anywhere if you give them a radio and a mission and a purpose of being there for the most part. There's nobody that's any more helpful than the local amateur radio operators.
And no self-respecting ham is going to live in the quiet zone either. That's no fun.
That's okay.
And that may be part of it. If you're a big radio operator, you know, some people look to see where the mall's at when they're buying a house, or some people look to see where there's a good school, and then some people like you would never buy a house in the quiet zone because you couldn't talk on your radio. Now let's talk about the state system just a minute. We know how important interoperable radio is. It's been brought up, like I said, since the 70s. It was brought up 2 weeks ago. We're better in some jurisdictions. We are better in some ways. In other ways, we haven't made the strides that we should. In 2004, there were 3 counties in West Virginia that had a vision. And I wished I had been one of those counties, but those guys were very forward-thinking. They knew there was some grant money out there, and they went by the cover of darkness, kept it secret from everybody else that they were doing it, and they drove to Washington, D.C., and they handed in their packet, and they ended up getting one of the grants. The late Fred Smart, which was a great guy, was a very forward-thinking gentleman from Harrison County, Ron Kyle from Monongalia County, and the emergency manager at the time from Marion County. Harrison, Mon, and Marion were those 3 counties that looked to build a regional radio system that would work. It wasn't long after that that a doctor by the name of Dr. Ramsey, which was our medical director at the time on the state level, said, well, let's bring the state microwave system and use it to tie in and carry those counties together. And then somebody put a tower over into the eastern panhandle, and somebody brought one down to Charleston and tied one over to Huntington. And people started taking these radios and talking on them with clarity that absolutely floored most of us. The coverage and the clarity and the way the system worked was unreal. So in a short period of time since 2004, it's not even been 10 years, the state has built numerous tower sites. I'd like to tell you exactly how many. I'd say somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 sites right now.
110.
110 now? Okay. 110 sites, either on the air, planned, or under construction. Those sites spread from one end of the state to the other. Those radios allow us to communicate. Now, some counties, the 911 directors or the emergency managers and the county commissions have embraced it jumped on it, tried to get as much grant money as they could, and they have really, really jumped into it. Others have said, it was good enough for my daddy when we used tin cans in the fire service, and it'll be good enough for me to use tin cans, and I just don't buy it. And others have been somewhere in the middle. But let me say this, with every disaster, there's a window of opportunity that opens. That window of opportunity opens, it's open for a short period of time, and then that window slowly closes, and then it slams shut. And that's what happened to us on 9/11. A window of opportunity opened. Chances are none of us in this room would be here if it wasn't for 9/11 and our need to revive CERT teams across the country and bring them involved. That window opened and money started flowing in and people started to be very innovative. And now every year since 9/11, the money has shriveled up, and sooner or later the window shuts, and then there'll be another 9/11 or a similar incident, and that window will open again for a few years, and then it will close. So my philosophy with interoperable radio was seize the opportunity, get all you can, because if I don't, Jeff will. And then if I don't, somebody else will. Get everything you can, embrace it, because there's not always going to be money there. One of the things that a lot of fire departments have done, there's a ton of fire departments across the state that have got Fire Act grants and bought interoperable radios for every single person on those departments. Those were the lucky counties. I've not been quite so lucky yet. The thing about the state interoperable radios are that there's 110 sites, as Jeff clarifies. Each of those sites are tied together with a radio microwave system. And as you go from one location to the other, the radio roams, or the radio changes zones, much like your cell phone does. If you walk out of here, make a cell phone call outside, get into your car, and you start driving toward Huntington, chances are you'll be able to carry that cell phone call the entire distance, but you may talk to 3 or 4 different towers as you talk between here and Huntington. Is that correct? That's how it roams. Same thing with these radios. In the city of Charleston, we have a tower on the west side, which is called Garfield. We have one that sits on Building 5 at the state capitol. We have one that sits on Malden Mountain, which is on the far eastern end of the city limits, just outside the city. We have one at Samarico. We have one at Coal Mountain toward the western end of the valley. And if we start a transition on one end of town, our radio may change channels a couple of times. But the radio has enough sense to know how to change channels and be able to allow us to follow through with it. Each of the radios have frequencies, but we don't refer to the channels in the radio as a frequency on a digital system. We refer to them as talk groups. And a talk group basically means it's your own little private party line or your own little group for you to use. And as you key that radio up, the radio assigns the frequency for you to use for your individual conversation. Some talk groups work statewide. Some talk groups work within a region or within an area. There's no reason for Charleston Fire to work much outside Kanawha County. There's no reason for Charleston Fire to work in Morgantown. There's no reason for Charleston Fire Frequency to work in Huntington. Because if it did, every time we went to a WVU ball game, somebody would take a radio with them and they'd be listening to what was going on, and they tried it, would overload the system. So the talk groups are regional for the most part. But every single county in the state of West Virginia has a 911 talk group. So you have 911 Lincoln, 911 Kanawha, 911 Jackson, and you have the ability to talk to that 911 center from anywhere in the state. And Jeff,
11.
if he takes that radio, he could turn it on and go to 911 Berkeley County and talk to Berkeley County from here.
How about Jefferson?
Go to Jefferson. They always answer.
Jefferson Dispatch, Kanawha 995.
Go ahead.
Ma'am, just conducting a class. You're demonstrating interoperability. Thank you.
So Jefferson County, furthest point in the state from here, clear as a bell. The digital radios have good penetration in the majority of the buildings inside the city of Charleston. Now, I've heard some people say, oh, these radios don't work as good as what we used to have. But what we used to have used to be wideband. And when Charleston PD went from wideband to narrowband back in the fall of the year, they found out the coverage that we were going to lose with narrowband communications. And that's why 2 weeks ago they jumped on this system. And for the most part, I think they're very pleased with the coverage that they've got. Are you getting the same feedback?
That's an understatement, yes.
That's an understatement. They've got coverage in places that they never had. But we still have some areas in the city that we don't have good coverage on our radios. Part of that is you understanding where your radios work and where they don't. This radio in my hand is 4 watts. I would assume your Motorola is 5 watts on the UHF side, a little bit more powerful. The 20 series Kenwoods are 5 watts.
Yeah, we're 5.
These are 4. But a mobile radio, on the other hand, is anywhere between 25 and maybe 50, maybe even 100 watts. So using the right radio in the right location. But if we go to Capitol High School here, out by the airport, if we go into the inner part of the old Canal Mall back in there where DMV is, we have some radio problems, but we knew that. So we kind of leave somebody outside the structure and we can communicate. I guess what I'm trying to get the point across is interoperability is more than just using the siren radios. The siren radios are a great thing, and it's allowed us to be able to do an awful lot of really good things with it. We've used it on a couple of disasters in Lincoln County. The Red Cross comes through the door, well, we're going to go here and here and here today, and I say, okay, great, here's a radio, here's the number I'm assigning you, and when you go out and you go do your area, call us in and give us some feedback. So what used to take all day before we saw that Red Cross representative at the end of the day to give us a report, we got as they periodically traveled throughout the county. That was very, very important to us. Likewise, Department of Transportation was using these radios for graders in the area, talking to open up certain roads when we had a tornado come through Lincoln County last year. It came out of Kentucky, went through part of Wayne, part of Lincoln County. It allows a lot of different people to use it, and there's lots of talk groups that can be assigned to them. One thing I do want to keep in mind, what makes West Virginia's system kind of unique is West Virginia's system is owned and operated by many different people. Not just one agency controls or runs the system, but the State Interoperable Radio Network governance group, state police bought the switch that operates the system in the southern part of the state. Harrison and Marion and Mon bought that system up in that area through a grant. City of Wheeling's bought part of the system. Several counties have bought tower sites in their jurisdiction to enhance the coverage in that specific area. They had the system that started to work so well when they put the tower up in Berkeley County on the top of the mountain. Jefferson County said, this is awesome. So the Jefferson County Commission allocated enough money to add a site in their county and then tied it into the statewide network. So the system doesn't belong to just one entity. But in our county, the local water company uses the radios some. The public transportation uses the radios. The fire departments use it on a limited level. EMS uses it about 95% of the time in Lincoln County. Police department uses it about 95% of the time. Currently in Charleston Fire and EMS have used it since 2007. Charleston PD's used it for 2 weeks. But in addition to that, there are agencies across the state that are using it, like the FBI, ATF, CSX. There are federal.
Well, I'm with the threat preparedness program for the DHHR, and we were all given interoperable radios. It's not our expense.
Well, it all depends.
We need to have drills and exercises. We need to have some kind of a system where we use them regularly so we'll know how to.
A large portion of that was because the higher-ups within WVDHHR wanted to set down a state standard, and it took them 4 or 5 years to do that, and they still never did it. So finally, a lot of the DHHR units in this area came together, and the counties are programming their radios for them, and the counties have set their radios up so they can be used on a county level.
That's what we do.
We've got a pretty active bundle group that encompasses most of the health departments. Lincoln, Putnam, Cabell, Wayne, all of those get together, and they're doing monthly tests. That everybody goes to one channel and everybody calls off. The only thing that I stress is that when you do that, set up some standards. When I did a class for the health department in that area, And the buttons on the radio, when the person programs it, they can program each of these buttons to do certain things. Make sure that they're programmed consistently within the agencies, or is consistent with what public safety is doing. Because if the blue button over here makes the radio start singing in one county, it ought to do that in all the counties, so that when you share resources and you share radios, there's not a problem with each other learning how to use the radios. Go ahead.
Alan, for this group, it might be, if you could talk about ACU capabilities just a little bit, because, you know, you're not talking about up in the 800s, but...
There is a limited amount of 800 used in the state.
Yeah.
An ACU is one way of doing interoperability. They make an ACU 1000, make a 3000, an ACU M, and I don't even know what does ACU stand for.
You know, we got in that discussion last night, and I don't know, I put a guess to it, but...
What'd you guess?
I don't even remember.
JPS, Raytheon, they make a device called an ACU. An ACU is a box. And
There's also a 2000 series out.
And some of those boxes can be mounted into a rack. And the one I have been using it in Lincoln County to patch something together. But the time that it's been used, Dave Irwin borrowed it here in Kanawha County, one of the last times the vice president came to town. And he's coming tonight, so I'm doing my best to get out of the Civic Center before he gets here, because things get very heavy, and I'm afraid he'll take my health care away from me before I leave. But needless to say, the ACU allows you to link radios of a different type together. So I can take this ACU, come out of it with a cable, and I can take Jeff's radio and plug into it. And then, who else do we have? Who else has a radio with them? You got a radio with you?
I wish.
Oh, you
I thought I'll bring it mine, but.
okay. Let's say, what's your name?
Wyatt.
Wyatt? Okay. Wyatt brings a radio in from the far reaches of the state, and Wyatt says, there's 25 of us and we all have our radios, but we can't talk to Jeff. And Jeff is our incident commander for the incident. You're helping Jeff. So you give us one of your radios, and we take it in, we bring it over here, we plug it in, we hook it up, and then we punch a couple little buttons on here, and your radio talks to his radio, linked through the ACU. That's what it does. It's as simple as that. You can plug multiple radios into it. You can plug an Ethernet connection and do some limited functionality over an Ethernet connection. The ACUs starting at $3,000 to $4,000 range and go up from there. They have some that come in suitcases. They have some that hook mobiles together, and they have some that hook, like I said, portables together. There are several of those that exist across the state. You all have one?
There's two master gateways that I know about. You might know others. Wheeling, they have a master gateway that connects IRP, I know, their local radios, and also high marks. In Pleasant County, we have one that was state funded that ties not only IR or siren, pardon me, marks and GEMNAT, which is our 800 plus a lot of other radios. That's a ACU 2000. But I don't know of any others, but I know
there are several that exist in suitcase. What time we have?
15 after 12.
Okay. We have several that exist in suitcases. I think Wayne County has one, and Lincoln has one. Kanawha County's got some for its trailer, right? Southern West Virginia and Community and Technical College in the southern part of the state. So what in the world do they have? Well, they operate Task Force 1 and the Mine Rescue Group. Honestly, they've got a communications vehicle that they can pull into the scene of a mine incident. And in my opinion, I like the way it's set up better than state communication vehicle. It's got numerous radios that can be patched together on numerous bands. So the ACU is an easy way to patch your radios to other people's radios in the event of a catastrophe. Or, you know, Jeff's got a $6,500 radio that does UHF and VHF. Well, I can get an ACU and I can take his radios that were $500 and Jeff's radios and patch them together, and it's a much cheaper solution on a day-to-day basis, and you can break the connection when you need to and then rejoin the connection when you need to. So that ACU is a good tool. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Go ahead.
Tell me about vulnerabilities.
Vulnerability on?
The radio system you're carrying. What, I mean, we're talking about all these radio systems. Where
There is vulnerability with every radio system, but I'm going to tell you that that's something that you have to sit down and look at a local level, and you have to sit down and look at what could take my system down, what could bring me down, and what is my plan for dealing with the radio systems if they fail. Do I have generators? Do I have batteries? Do I have connectivity? Now, the state system in Charleston has failed a few times. The system has been under a constant upgrade situation. We're expanding capacity and expanding the microwave system. When anybody ever experienced a situation where you can dial your local telephone numbers, but you can't dial outside your local exchange?
Yes.
Okay, well, they call that going into standalone in the telephone business. This little tiny exchange over here in Hamlin can't talk to the other exchange on the other end of the county, which is 756, because the connectivity between the two is broken. It's either a fiber optic now, pretty much a fiber optic cable connecting the two central offices has failed. Well, the state system has the same possible thing that can happen. That connectivity, which is microwave, can go down. We lost a tower yesterday morning because of the wind. One of the microwave dishes was swung over to the left a little bit. Had to get somebody on the tower to realign those. But when that occurs, you have this tower that can talk, but this tower can't talk. So if you have towers or multiple towers within your county, you can't talk between each other, but you can talk to that tower. So what have some counties done? They've gotten one radio in their dispatch center and fixed it where it only talks to this tower, and they've got another radio in their dispatch center, set it up where it only talks to the other, and then they've patched the two together with an ACU, where they've patched the two together with a console. So that can be done. With this particular radio, what we did in Charleston was we were VHF until we started using the state system. We asked for a license and put our own UHF channel on the air. So in this radio, channel 1, 2, and 3 are state channels. 4 is our own repeater, which is UHF in the city of Charleston. It doesn't have the coverage that the state system does. That's what we get toned across, and if you monitor that channel, you'll hear the two-tone beep, bop, but that's all you'll hear. And then the audio traffic to the dispatch goes across the state digital channel. And it's in our plan that if we lose the state digital channel, we go to channel 4 and operate that way. We still have the same communications, maybe not as well, but it's there. Part of it's planning. Part of it's being prepared to link those sites together. And as redundant as the state wants to think the system is, every system has the possibility or the potential to fail. So I don't know, did that kind of answer your question?
During Hurricane Katrina, which affected Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, all those states but Florida lost their statewide networks like the one we're talking about in that storm. So the bigger they are, the harder they fall. If 40%, 60% of our agencies in Kanawha County rely on that system and it dies, that's not a good thing.
Somebody says, well, they're replacing our radios with these state radios. That is the wrong way to look at it. They are not replacing our radios with the state. They are enhancing our radios with state radios. There will always be a need for what we're calling legacy radios. There will always be a need for radios at the local level and channels and power sites. Will they look like they do today? Maybe not. Will you need as many of them as you have today? Maybe not. Will the footprint could be different, probably so. But think of these as an enhancement, not a replacement. Yes, sir.
All right, just curiosity, how often do you all get paged a day? Just a call.
We'll keep in mind that we use fire and EMS. Charleston has 8 fire stations, 4 ambulances, and some of the ambulances will run between 12 and 18 calls each within 24 hours. So maybe 40 or 50 times on the EMS side and 15 to 20 times on the fire side, a lot. But the type of calls that you see in the city of Charleston vary a lot from what you see in a rural area. We end up doing box alarms and elevator rescues and car wrecks and a lot more stuff than just fires. It's a whole different ballgame.
I know here recently with us in the CERTAN program up in Wood County, we was actually fortunate enough that we was able to obtain one of the former Wood County rescue frequencies for our operations for training and for our deployments when we're deployed. They give us our own DPL tone for it because they're going to eventually put the repeater back up. But it's at levels like that, I mean, just like you're saying, you know, that's more of a local level to where the CERT teams themselves can go out and buy like the radios, the cheaper radios and steel, but we use the FMRS radios and the GMRS radios also. But it's another way, a gateway to where we can co-exert with everybody else.
Absolutely. And those radios are much more affordable than a $6,700 radio. That, like I said, you're going to be very important to need $6,700 for a radio. Jeff's going to throw something at me, but how many else in the room's got a $6,700 radio with you today? See, you do too? Oh, okay, one more. They're super good radios, and the thing about the state system is P25 compatibility. The state radio system allows for Motorola, Johnson, Kenwood, Harris. There is a whole group of radios, and I probably left a couple out, I'm sure. But there are many different radios, many different brands that will work on the state system. And yes, you can buy a $6,700 radio, but you can also buy a $950 radio that works on the state system too. So don't let that scare you away. And when you say $950, that's not far from the price that we paid for a simple, easy Motorola HT radio 15 or 20 years ago. Every radio costs that much money. You know, so every radio doesn't have to cost that much money. Any other questions or comments? Enjoy your stay in Charleston. If you get into trouble in the next few hours, call Jeff, not me.